Guys, the United States of America's population surfaces around 375 million to 400 million, excuse me. And renters, households who rent, obviously as their prime residence, make up 30 to 35% of the U.S. population. So that's, 100 to maybe 110 million, if not more. These are rough numbers. 100 to 110 million U.S. households rent, excuse me. And 50% of those, around 50%, if not more, of the renter population in the United States, they spend over 30% of gross income in housing, which is overhead. Over 30%. So example, if a family is making $5,000, it's grossed $5,000. So really their take home is anywhere between $3,500 and about $4,200, depending on tax contributions, medical contributions, what state they live in, and how they've done their W-9, right? So, 10 to 12% is taxed. But numbers is based off of gross income. Just know that. Because I think there's people who don't know that when they're trying to buy or even rent a home. It's their first home, they're moving from their parents and from their friends and whatever, and they don't understand that gross income that you see in your offer letter isn't what you make at the end of the week or end of the month or end of the year. So just an FYI. But for some reason, purchasability or affordability is based off of gross income. That's been my biggest knock with the housing economy, whether it's a buyer's market or seller's market, for years. Why are we doing stuff off of gross income? It's a best guess. We're all human, right? Anyway, someone makes $5,000 gross per that stat. That means overhead, rent, internet, any maintenance, maybe HOA, right? Utilities, right? That makes up your overhead, right? If you have renter's insurance, if you didn't hear me, sorry. That means 30% of that $5,000 you gross a month. That's $1,500 in real money. That's $1,500 in actual net that you spend a month. That's what I got. Which, if you really think about it, in hindsight, that's not bad. If you could get a 2 or 3 bedroom, 3 or 4 bedroom house and your overhead is $1,500, that's okay. The problem is the income's too low, right? The average income for a household, this is buyers and renters in America, is around 70,000 USD. So that breaks down to just under $6,000 a month. And that works in relation to the average rent in America, that's around $2,000. But look at how the math works. It doesn't. You're living way above means if your rent is $2,000, which is the national average, and your income is only $70,000, which is the national average. It's skewed. Any financier, can look at that shit and be like, that doesn't make sense, because the national average of 70,000 is gross income. That means I'm not really making $5,750 a month, right? I'm making maybe $4,380 a month, but my bills, my overhead, my rent alone is $2,000, and my overhead puts me at 50% of my actual net income. God forbid I have kids. God forbid I have kids with special needs. God forbid I have a medical accident. God forbid my car goes out. I think these are why people aren't having kids today. That's one. I would assume the reasons don't stop there, but that's one good reason I would imagine. And then 2, this is why people can't buy a home. If your gross income cannot even sustain a day-to-day, your day-to-day cost of living, how can you save to, you know, how can you save for the American dream, quote unquote? How can you save to buy a house, right? Be an owner, right? Put yourself in an investment opportunity, a long-term investment opportunity, when you could barely afford rent. You know, that's a problem. That's not demographic based. That's half of the renters in the U.S. basically can barely afford housing. That's what it means. Because if you look at it, right, and this is all in plain sight, guys. This is all in our face. This is all in our face, right? Just Google this stuff. Google it, Chat GPT it. Whoa. Google it, Chat GPT it, man. Like, it's right here. I looked up, well, what does affordability mean? Because like I said, those words, purchasability and affordability is two different things. And people think just because you can purchase something, that means you can afford it, especially if interest is tied to it. So what does that really mean? Because anybody can really get pre-qualified. I'm not gonna say anybody, but most people get pre-qualified, although a lot of offers go canceled because we're moving into that age, right? You know, a lot of, you know, agreements get to a halt. But the affordability crisis is astronomical, right? So even when you're buying a home, you know, they look at a debt to income ratio. Your mortgage, which is comprised of any principal, obviously, insurance, and then taxes, if it's escrowed, right? Right? That should be no more than 28% of your gross income. And even to me, I think that's high. I think we should really all be able to bubble around 20%. And maybe mean we can't get the dream home we want, or we're not ready to buy yet. I mean, that's just really, it's kind of that simple. But 28% of your gross income should be the limit or maximum amount you spent for your mortgage. So what does that mean? In the same breath, if you make $5,000 a month, not only should you not get pre-qualified for, but you won't be able to afford. You shouldn't be paying, right, more than about $1,200 or $1,300, whatever that math works out to. I think it's about, if that, I think it's about $1,300. You gotta do the math. You just do 5,000 times 28%. All right. Or you could do basically 5,000 divided by 4. Because in my head, it should really float between 20 to 25%. Give yourself a buffer. All right. But these are people with CPAs and financial degrees. Again, these are people making up rules. So guys, always think about that. It should be subjective in your perspective and how you want to live your life. Right. The less you pay in overhead, the less you pay, the more flexibility you have in life. That's just simple. But it's insane to me that they look at 28% mortgage, because when you're buying a home, they want you at like 48 to 49% of, you know, allocated monthly debt to income. So including even if you're not paying on the debt and it's just sending your collections or whatever, like they look at like, hey, if you were to pay this back month to month, what is all that equal compared to your income? So if your debt breaks down to, in that same example of $5,000 income, you won't even get approved for a house if you have debt that exceeds $2,400, $2,500 a month. So obviously, if you're not already in a house situation, if you're a first-time buyer, if you have a, you know, but they look at a car, if you have a car payment, or if you don't have a car payment, like the less debt you have coming into a financing situation, obviously the better, along with your credit. So renting helps with, you know, good tenancy. But anyway, the constraints with buying is even harder for renting. But how do we get to the buying part if the constraints for renting doesn't even make sense? And guys, all this stuff, the basis of cost of living, the basis of affording overhead in America, it should foundationalize us to get to next level, right? To get to be able just to focus on promoting ourselves or get into, promotions with work, next level, right? We can worry about our kids more. We have a stable living. We could prepare for long-term retirement, or even before then, we could filter in things that we want to do and love to do in life. But that is not the case. That ain't the case. A good 20 to 25% of Americans, which is big, will never be able to buy a home just because of the renting economy, the economy of housing under the renting category. So how can you truly retire for real, if you're always renting, right? It's possible. It's possible, but buying a home was always the foundation of general equity building. And that's moving far, far away. It's becoming luxurious and becoming very, very dispersed. So look that shit up, man. It's really insane.